All right, hello and welcome everyone to today's Faculty Leading the Change series, powered by OTLME, as the Office of Teaching and Learning Mentoring Excellence. Here are the instructions for our Zoom webinar room. We'll just go ahead and jump to our next slide. So welcome, we're really excited to have our presenters with us today for our session, Applying Relational-Cultural Theory as a Pedagogy to Promote Caring in Asynchronous Classroom. Today we have Dr. Jinnelle Powell and Dr. Kathleen Livingston here to present for us. All right, let me just give you a little information about the Office of Teaching, Learning, and Mentoring Excellence. We specialize in faculty training and professional development, and here's our email. Please let us know how we can help you. All right, here are our presenters. Would you guys like to introduce yourselves? We're so happy to have you here with us today.
Sure. Go ahead, Jinnelle.
Yeah, so I'm Jinnelle Powell. I'm a core faculty with Walden University in the School of Counseling, and I teach in the master's program and the doctoral program.
And I'm Kathleen Livingston. I'm the Associate Dean and Academic Program Director for our master's program in the School of Counseling. So if you're joining us live, if you will put in the chat, where are you joining us from? What program are you coming from? That would be great. Today, Jinnelle and I are going to talk about a couple of different things related to the relational cultural theory. So we're going to start with some basic constructs related to RCT, and then how do you apply that as a pedagogy to facilitate a community of care that we want to create for our students here at Walden. And so then we'll end with some specific examples that we've used in the department to apply RCT in this asynchronous environment. Next slide.
Okay, so this is me. So first, I want to say, when it comes to relational cultural theory, there are kind of a lot of different types of concepts within the theory itself that kind of support what this looks like in human interaction and human development. And these are just a few of the main ones that are very important and are kind of relevant to what we're going to talk about today. So first, I have vulnerability and authenticity, and I think that's really one of the most essential pieces to engaging in the practice of RCT. I think you can't be authentic without being vulnerable, right? And in order to have a sense of mutuality in the whatever relationship you're applying this to, there does need to be that sense of I'm bringing my truest self to the relationship. And I'm bringing in a sense of vulnerability because if I am showing my true self, then I'm kind of taking off that mask, so to speak, right? And that can be a little scary. But that's one of the basic tenets. And that leads into the ability to engage in a mutual relationship, one where there's a sense of mutual empowerment, there's mutual growth. Both people in the relationship are experiencing some sort of growth throughout the relationship. So that's what mutuality kind of means. In terms of power with versus power over, it's one of my favorite pieces of relational cultural theories. It kind of challenges those patriarchal constructs that we are kind of raised within the United States. Some background here: relational cultural theory is really rooted in a lot of feminist. Ideals and the mothers of RCT were Judith Jordan, Jean Baker Miller, Irene Stiver. They had these groups, these Monday night groups, and they talked about how there were these power over dynamics, even in their experiences in understanding how to engage in the therapeutic process, right? There was a separateness that didn't quite feel right for them. And through that, the birth of RCT kind of came over years. But that power with versus power over, it kind of really challenges the idea that I'm a person of authority and the other person is a recipient of that authority or has to kind of bend to that will. within RCT, we say we both have power. And I'm going to acknowledge the power that I may have in the role as maybe a therapist, or in our case, an educator, right? So I do have some power, but I want to engage you in what that looks like instead of me being an authoritarian type of educator. Within RCT, we embrace diversity. That's another big thing. That's the cultural piece of relational cultural theory, is recognizing that there is a macro system within which an individual lives within, and there may be oppressive factors that may lead to marginalization, experiences of discrimination, or microaggressions that impact an individual's ability to engage in relationships with educators, right? And so there's an embracing and recognition of that within the theory. With relational images, what this construct refers to is we all come into a relationship with a prior experience. This is my favorite topic too, because it kind of leans into neuroscience. And RCT in recent years has been affirmed by neuroscientists in terms of its accuracy. And relational images really speaks to these templates that we start to build about the way we view the world around us. So, I'm in high school and I get a bad grade and I try to talk to my teacher about it. And my teacher, kind of shames me and says, "Well, you should have studied harder. And that's not my fault. And the grade is what it is." Now, fast forward to being a master's student or a bachelor student in a, a graduate level program or an undergrad program, and I get a bad grade. I don't feel comfortable reaching out to my teacher, my educator, because I've got this relational image, this negative relational image that supports the belief and idea that if I do, I will be shamed. Right. So now I'm coming into this with a relational image. There's also the opposite of that, where there are positive relational images. And so hopefully today we'll kind of talk through what that can look like, where we can establish and replace those any negative with positives, or build upon positive relational images, where I went to my teacher and I said, "I really want a second chance." And my teacher was kind and caring and compassionate and offered me the opportunity to do some extra credit, or retake the exam, because when I took the exam initially, I was under a significant amount of stress. Um, and so I'm able to carry that relational image moving forward, as our students would. So that's another one of my favorite constructs within RCT. Now, the central relational paradox is a place that we can kind of find ourselves stuck within. We kind of get into this limbo space where we are yearning for connection, but because we've experienced chronic disconnection, so not only was my high school teacher not compassionate and inflexible, but I went to college and I experienced that same dynamic with several of my faculty. And then I went to grad school and continued to experience that. So now I've made all these attempts to try to connect, and I've been told over and over and over again that I'm unable to experience this positive relationship with a person in a position of power or authority. So I yearn for connection, but I myself engage in strategies of disconnection. And we see this kind of play out with students who are unresponsive to emails. If I respond to that email, then they're going to get mad at me because now it's been too late. And they have all this inner dialogue based off of these negative relational images. And they're stuck in this central relational paradox where they desire that connection. They want that connection. They're here for a reason, but they don't know quite how to get unstuck. So that's kind of a description of what central relational paradox might look like. In terms of connections and disconnections, this is the ebb and flow of relationships. Both contribute to growth. Disconnections are just as important and especially relevant in the educator role, because we do have a power relationship with these students. We're in an evaluative role with them. So we do experience some ruptures or disconnections in the relationship. Those provide space to deepen the connection, to acknowledge the role of academic integrity and ensuring that our students are developed enough to graduate and be successful, while maintaining a space of mutual growth, authenticity, and uh, uh, vulnerability. And then the five good things. These are the things that we experience whenever we are, and I always have to Google them real quick because I always forget them all. I should have done that right before. Um, but the five good things are what we experience when we are in a growth fostering mutual relationship. So we experience zest, we experience a increase in our productivity and creativity. I don't know if you guys have ever left a relationship with a faculty person or even with a student. I know I just got off of a call with a student and I felt like this boost of energy out of the connection that we had. And I immediately went on and started doing some things related to that student's role. And I felt that increase in my productivity. That's one of the five good things that we experience when we have those positive connections. We increase our sense of self worth and we have a sense of clarity. So now we can kind of understand ourselves in the world a little bit better. Um, I, the opposite of that, so I think I covered them all, right? That's
And Kathleen
Put them
just
in the
posted the
chat.
list. Oh, perfect.
empowerment. I missed empowerment. Is that the one I missed? Oh, I
The
can't see the
list is
chat.
in the chat. Thank
Oh,
you.
perfect. Thank you so much, my partner. Yes. So empowerment is another one that we experience whenever we have a positive connection and where there's mutual growth. And that one's another big one where you feel like, oh, I can leave this situation, I can go and get something done. Or I have power in this relationship. And hopefully, our students, when we engage in these practices within relational cultural theory experience are able to experience these five good things. And I think of like, what do I want out of a student? Well, I want them to have energy. I want them to be productive. I want them to be clear thinking. I want them to experience a sense of empowerment and that they have a desire for more connections, right? Those are our five good things that we experience whenever we have those relationships. And what an ideal student that makes. So when we engage in this practice as an educator, we're creating the students that we're hoping to see in the classroom. Okay, did I miss anything on those, Kathleen?
Nope, you
Okay,
got them.
awesome. All right, is this you or
Yep,
me?
so now
Yeah.
we're going to move into, so what does this really look like in our online asynchronous settings? And so the first space, if you'll go to the next slide that we see this.
Yes, and this one's me, right?
Yep.
Yes. Okay. So here we're letting students know they matter. So really kind of leaning into those constructs within relational cultural theory. What does this actually look like in practice? So we have opportunities to demonstrate this mattering in our email communications. We'll show you a couple of examples of what that can look like. But when we email, I know for me, I tend to kind of get on a roll sometimes, and I can be sometimes really direct in my communications. And I have to be mindful of acknowledging the student, right? So starting off that email with, thank you so much for reaching out, right? And I'm so sorry that you're going through this situation. So there's an acknowledgement piece in my communication with the student. I like to use emojis too in my email communications because I think that can kind of help soften anything that might be interpreted in a certain way, because we all know we have that lens when we're looking at an email, we're reading it through our own internal lens, and we may be using relational images to inform that way that we're viewing that email. So that's one way that you can let students know they matter. You can check in with them. I'll show you an example of that in a little while whenever they're missing assignments, and I'll talk about the importance of that. Anything else on email communications, Kathleen?
Well, I think one thing, now that we have the technology of artificial intelligence, you have the ability to use that to your advantage as an instructor. And so when you're thinking about drafting an email, of course, not putting personal information into like Chat GPT or what we have at Walden with Copilot, but you can use those tools to help you soften an email. Say, and you can even tell it, I'm writing an email to check in on a student. I want to be kind and compassionate and, display concern. Type that in and beautifully within a second, our artificial intelligence can help you with a template to get that started. So I know sometimes for me, when I'm wrapped up in my own, work and administrative task and a student, and I know I need to reach out to the student, but maybe I'm just myself not in that great headspace. But I really want to demonstrate that to the student. Use the tools that we have, lean on those, and to kind of help you reframe, rethink, and put some of that softness that Jinnelle was talking about back into those email communications.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for mentioning that. I myself am just getting used to Chat GPT, so I haven't gotten to that place yet. But yeah, that's such a good point. I think the other thing I like to do, which I talked to Kathleen when we were developing the presentation, is like something as simple as checking in on missing assignments. When I've talked to colleagues about this, they're like, "You do what?" And I'm like, "Yes." And let me tell you why. Because I think that students come in with these relational images and then think about like, when you do miss, when you drop a ball or when you do something wrong, like this shame that can come alongside with that. And we know sometimes our students can have perfectionistic tendencies. And so that'll like even just layer their inability to kind of get out of that central relational paradox. So I just quickly on Monday and Tuesday, I'll check in and see anybody who hasn't submitted from the week before. Hey, just wanted to check in with you. I noticed this assignment was not due on Sunday. I didn't see you submit it. Is everything okay? And more often than not, what I'm getting from students is, oh my gosh, thank you so much for reaching out. I didn't know how to say this, but I'm going through this personal issue right now. And that's more often what I get. On occasion, I get the email, yep, it just slipped my mind, or I just been busy, and they are apologetic. But those ones that email me, it makes such a big difference where they say, thank you so much. I was so afraid to reach out, or I didn't know how to say this. I really appreciate you caring. So they're seeing that they matter, that they're not just going to get a zero and a note, that I'm going to reach out to them and I'm going to connect and see what's going on for them. What are their unique circumstances and how do I keep them engaged? And I always like to add, let me know how I can support your success in this classroom. Because I really want them to know that's what I'm here to do is to support them through whatever challenges they may be experiencing. Um, so
And
yeah.
one thing that I know that some of our team here at Walden is working on is another tool that's going to be in Canvas so that when you're interacting with students in the classroom, you're going to easily be able to connect them to resources, right? So I see we have somebody from OASIS here. So a shout out to all of you. But can do a direct referral straight out of Canvas. And so that's exciting because that's another way you're going to show to the student that they matter is because you're going to recognize, hey, maybe I can easily get in touch with their advisor and say, hey, can you check in on this student? They've been inactive for a couple of weeks, or I noticed, they really, or they told me they were really struggling on this assignment, and get them some writing resources or some library support or things like that straight out of the classroom. So that's exciting to know that's coming so that you'll have that resource for you as another way to show them that they matter in the classroom.
Oh, absolutely. I love that. That's so amazing because I always feel that kind of disconnect too. Like, okay, no, Oasis is there. Let me get you connected there. But to have it some kind of like simplistic in that way will just really strengthen that system. That's amazing. Yeah, and then discussion board engagements. That's another, I think, a very crucial way to let students know they matter. A couple ways I do this, and I've learned this from my mentors at Walden. I keep an Excel sheet and I track which students I'm responding to so that each week I'm responding to different students so that I'm not only responding to the people who always respond on time, right? Because they will tend to get, my responses right away because they're posting earlier on Wednesday, but then I'm also giving space for the students who maybe have a really busy work schedule and the soonest they can is Wednesday at midnight, right? Like that's when they can. And that's okay. That's what Walden is about. I think it lends to that space. And so I want those students to know they matter too. Um, and then really personalizing our responses. When I've had the space and time, I love to do a video response to the student so they can hear me versus just reading. So I think that's another really neat way to engage with students and let them know that they matter and personalizing our responses.
Mhm. And if I can pipe in, I think a simple thing that most of us do, and maybe not even realize how it's connected to RCT, is using somebody's name. That
Oh,
it's just personalizes, hey, I'm talking
100%.
to you, not just a generic, maybe cut and paste discussion board response, right? I'm talking to you and I'm highlighting things that you mentioned in your post to further signify I've read this and
Yeah.
I'm expanding on what you said, and so I think those are small ways that we can let students know they matter and that you've taken the time to really get to know them and to reflect on their work as opposed to maybe other students in your class.
Yes, and you also made me think of something else that we hadn't mentioned, but like when I'm responding to is how does what they're saying maybe even connect to something that I can share, that I can be vulnerable and authentic with them about?
Sure.
Like, and I think there's a space where, right, where it's like as therapists, we can be vulnerable and we can disclose. We don't got to tell the whole story, right? We can give a
Right.
piece of it. The same thing as an
Right.
educator. And so I think in those ways, that's an opportunity to demonstrate that vulnerability and authenticity in just a discussion board response where, oh my gosh, I went through something similar in my master's program. Thank you so much for sharing. I think you will oftentimes see some of my responses like, I appreciate your courage and vulnerability, right? When students are self disclosing. And then that gives me an opportunity to connect with them in that way too, in the discussion board.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And even linking students like Janelle, I see that you were talking about this particular topic, and then I saw Tyler, you mentioned this as well. And it seems like y'all have similar experiences or have, witnessed this in a certain way. I think linking students is important too as a way to help them build those relationships with each other as well. Yeah.
Yes.
Next slide.
Okay, so here, this is kind of leading into what I was just talking about, the professor vulnerability and authenticity, and what does that actually look like in the classroom? So we have our introduction videos. I think that's a nice time to be able to just genuinely show up as who you are, the way that you present. And sharing a little bit about yourself outside of just, okay, this is who I am. I'm a professional counselor and I'm an educator and I've been here this many years. But then to also add in, I'm a mother of four and I've got a blended family and I've got two dogs and two cats, right? And so we can have that authenticity and being a little bit vulnerable and sharing pieces of ourselves with our students. And I often find like that alone connects students with you because they'll automatically start sharing, I have two dogs or I have a cat too. Here's my cat. And so we start to build that relationship and that sense of mutuality in that way. And then, as I mentioned earlier, that empathic self disclosure is letting students know, especially when they are going through something where they're experiencing challenges. I will share with them, yes, I've gone through specific challenges whenever I was a master's student. And this was how I was able to navigate that. Have you looked at your resources or supports? So, I'm not necessarily going into details about the challenges I experienced, but I'm letting them know, hey, I've been in a space where I've felt alone or I felt like I didn't have access to resources, but here's some that we have at the university because this was pivotal for me when I was a student. If I didn't go to the university counseling center, I wouldn't have been able to, get through that really stressful time. And so being able to demonstrate that empathy and that self disclosure can sometimes make all the difference for a student who does feel alone and isn't necessarily aware of what resources are available, because we do have a lot of resources here at Walden through Oasis. And then the term here, boundaries and connection. So, this is a term coined by Harriet Schwartz, who has really done a lot of research and work on the application of relational cultural theory as a pedagogy in the classroom. She wrote Connected Teaching. It's a great quick read, has a lot of these principles kind of laid out in them. One of my favorite texts. But in one of her early articles, where she talks about the classroom to the coffee shop and really like having relationships with students that are kind of outside of the boundaries of the classroom. And how do we do that while also holding boundaries with our students, right? So that is something that can get a little bit gray and blurred. And I think is important to mention here because we can still have a strong relationship with a student without telling them every single aspect about ourselves. We still have to remember we're in an evaluative role with them. There is a level of academic integrity that we're holding them to, and we have to remember that's a big part of our relationship. And those boundaries where I'm not telling the whole story, or I'm not responding at midnight on a Saturday to an email, or picking up my phone, or giving out my personal phone number, or engaging in any other kind of relationship with a student, those are there and they're designed to keep us in relationship, not out of relationship. And we can sometimes hear the word boundaries and think, oh, that's just a barrier, but it's absolutely not. It allows us to hold the relationship together in a way that continues a healthy mutual growth fostering relationship as an educator and a student. So as we're thinking about being vulnerable and being authentic, remembering that boundaries are an essential part of this, and it allows us to truly help our students grow as in their academic journey. Anything else there, Kathleen, that you want to add?
I think you hit it, and I put the name of the book in the chat too. The Connected Teaching.
Yay, thank
It's
you.
I think it's in our references too. But
Yes.
yeah.
Yep. All right, next slide. So, in terms of some additional student support, we want to maintain that collaborative approach. So, working with the student to help and support them, having that empathic stance. So, always coming in through a lens of caring about the student. I always like to approach relationships with students with like best intentions.
Mhm.
I think my initial kind of response is always going to be like a little bit of judgment, right? Because like I just those relational images are really stuck there. I'm working on that. But I try to pause and then assume best intentions, right? Or understand that maybe this student is going through something that I have no idea about. Or I mean, maybe they are, they have that like negative inner critic and that's what's coming out for them, right? So I try to remember that in my engagement with my students, is having that empathic stance with them, is just exuding that sense of compassion. And then remembering that the outcome from this collaborative approach, that empathic stance, is that empowering outcome. And I have some examples too, but I have one right now that's coming up for me where I had a student who consistently, it was like my first quarter here teaching, and was just like the writing was just very poor writing. And you could tell that it was messy, it was all over the place, the APA. So, first couple weeks, I get it. It's a first course, first time you're writing, but I've given you feedback about 3 times at this point, right? So, I'm going to start really deducting points. And I offered to meet with a student, but I couldn't help but feeling this sense of like, gosh, what is happening for this student? And like, why aren't they trying? Right. And that was what was coming up, but I still remained, empathic with them. I asked to meet. They didn't want to meet right away for whatever reason. I said, that's okay. Let me know how I can support you. Here's some supports with the Writing Center I think could be really useful for you, and could be helpful. If you want to connect, let me know. Well, here we are, week 8, and they're still getting the same feedback, and we're still seeing very little improvement. So now the student wants to meet because they're really concerned about their grade. So I get on a Zoom call with the student, and 2 things pop out for me. One, this student has 3 marginalized identities, kind of woven into who they are that I didn't necessarily see in the asynchronous, discussion. So that was immediate, right? Like there's this automatic, likely power dynamic that could potentially be coming up. And through my conversation with the student, one of the things that the student I hopefully felt, I think he felt comfortable to share, was that he thought I didn't like him. And I thought that was an interesting perspective. And I said, absolutely not. I said, and I'm so sorry if anything I conveyed to you in my feedback appeared that way, but I'm here to support you. I was just trying to give you feedback on, areas that you needed to improve on. He said it would be also good to get some positive feedback. I said, oh my goodness, you are so right. I didn't realize that I wasn't doing that for you. And we ended up looking at a couple of the discussions that he had shared, and when he saw what I was looking at, he's like, "Oh my gosh, you're so right. thank you for like pointing this out in this way. And I saw some improvement the last couple of weeks. But it was through that collaborative approach, me remaining empathic, that by the end of it, the student was able to finish the course successfully and thanked me for supporting them during that time, where that could have potentially been, I don't know, possibly a complaint. This professor doesn't like me, right? We see those come through all the time. But that was just an example of like how I used, additional student support to guide that student through.
Yeah. I think you hit on some key components there about assuming good intentions. And
Yeah.
another thing, just remaining curious. What else? Because I think sometimes with our own, like you mentioned, relational images, we've put students in a particular box. And sometimes it's hard for us to see the forest for the trees, right? Like we've zoned in on something. And so because to us it's just prevalent, and it's like, well, this must be what it is, and so maybe not seeing the rest of the context. And so trying to stay in a place of curiosity of what else do I not know? What else could be a part of the story? And really remaining, keeping in our head, the honest student, this is a human. And sometimes I think in an asynchronous environment, we can dehumanize individuals, and so recognizing there's just a human component and that they're coming in with some context and with some filters. And like Jinnelle just mentioned, maybe the student has preconceived ideas of who you are. And so remaining curious in those spaces to see what is the extra pieces of this onion that we haven't peeled back, right? That we didn't even know were there, that are not exposed yet. And so taking the time to get to know who is this student and what else is there, if they're willing to step in that space with you.
Absolutely.
The next slide.
Yes.
So now we're gonna dive in and give you some examples of some of this, of how the RCT looks in action. And I know Jinnelle's already given you a couple examples as well too. But one thing I want us to center in, though, is, whatever program you're coming from or whatever support system that you provide at Walden, we always want to tie the support that we're doing back to those program learning outcomes. And so for us in counseling, we see it as a three-legged stool for our students, that ultimately coming out of our program, they not only need to have the knowledge, the theoretical knowledge of how to be a counselor, or for, other programs, how to be in the business world, or how to be, in the social work world, or how to be a nurse, but also the skills that come along with that. And then for us, what we have defined as professional dispositions. What are those, what's that, as a professional counselor, what does that look like? And so what we realized in the school counseling is sometimes people aren't coming from the same playing field and the same background in terms of even how they understand what professionalism looks like, and the expectations that are going to be held for somebody in the professional world. And through it all, we want our students to have a growth mindset, but we have to create a culture and we have to create an environment where they can grow and thrive, right? And so that safe environment, that community of care, is all to help them have this mindset where they're willing to be vulnerable, to grow not only in their knowledge, but in their skills, to take some risks, to put themselves out there, to try it out, but also professionally to be open to some guidance we may have of, you have all the book knowledge in the world, but the tone of how you're coming across is going to shut people off, right? The tone of this email, if you send that to the CEO of this company, you're going to be fired, And so, yes, an example I can give is our students, because we're at Walden, they came because they want to be social change agents, right? They're passionate about advocacy. They're passionate about getting in their community and advocating for those around them. But sometimes the way they go about that advocacy completely shuts the doors before they've even gotten there. And they could have all the book knowledge, they could have, um, all of the skills, but be lacking in just how they present it. And so helping our students really from a holistic perspective, of we want you to be open to these growing edges, and we're going to identify those, and we're going to challenge you. When Jinnelle was talking about boundaries, we're going to challenge you on those while you're in the program, because we want you to be successful in a holistic way. And I can tell you, Jinnelle and I were talking about this yesterday when we were practicing. We have those students that are really challenged when they don't get the A, right? That perfectionistic mindset. And you immediately point out, and maybe it's even a 0.5 deduction on something, but they're immediately go into this defensive stance, and not even able to hear the constructive feedback that you're trying to offer. And so, making sure that how we're approaching our students, that we're in the back of our mind thinking of these learning outcomes, thinking of them as a holistic student, and challenging ourselves that we need to push them, we need to hold them accountable, and ultimately, because that's what's going to make them a strong individual. That's what builds resilience, right? It's not through always getting the that you're going to build that resilience of, well, what do you do when you miss the mark? How do you approach that, and sit in that feedback to be able to grow? I know one of the terms that we've heard a lot at Walden, and in varying different ways, is gatekeeping. And some have very strong negative reactions to the word gatekeeping, because they see it as, well, gatekeeping is keeping people out, right? That you have prestige, or you have this elite attitude, and that's keeping people out. But if you turn it another way, and how we perceive it in the school of counseling, we have an ethical responsibility to gatekeep our students. It's not to keep them out. If we're letting them into the program, then it's our responsibility to wrap our resources around them and gatekeep and support them so that they can be successful in the program. So as opposed to keeping out, we're keeping in. The gate is to keep them in the program, to help them be successful in the program. And then once they get out in the field, right? So we need to have said that we've done everything that we possibly can to support them while we're here. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit, but just as another way of kind of framing this and rethinking that term in a way that makes sense, that our job is to not only support them academically, but if there's things that are prohibiting them from being successful, leaning on that relationship that we have with them to guide them and to provide remediation resources or support resources to help them, and ultimately have that growth mindset that they're here for a reason. They're here to learn, and they shouldn't have it all, and they shouldn't expect that they know it all. Even when they graduate, you're just now kind of launching and learning, right? So continuing that as kind of the bleeding thread, and those relational components with your students.
Next slide. Yes, so these are the emails that I was referring to earlier that I will send out to students who haven't engaged in maybe a discussion post. So I'm usually sending for discussion post engagement, I'm sending that like on Thursday, Friday, the same week, right? So they can meet that like before the Sunday deadline. If it's an assignment, I'll even maybe like check in on the day it's due. So that's like that first email. And then sometimes, like I said, Mondays and Tuesdays is when I'm looking in to see what was missing from the past week and to see what's going on for that student. And these are just very quick emails. They take me less than 5 minutes. Canvas actually has a feature where you go into the gradebook, you can click on the three buttons in the gradebook on the assignment, and it'll say email students or message students who haven't submitted. And so then it'll pull up any students who haven't submitted, and then you can send them as individual emails and you draft one email that way. So it can be that quick. And the responses I've gotten from these have been very positive from students to where they're like, thank you for caring. I mean, those are literal responses from them. Thank you for caring. I appreciate you reaching out. I wouldn't have reached out if you didn't reach out. And more often than not, they are going through something pretty significant. There's some extenuating circumstances that led to them not engaging. And so I really like doing this. It's a good way for me to assume best intent and to maintain a connection with my students. All right, next slide. I think on this one, so this is a example of what it looks like to hold those boundaries with our students and to uphold the standards of academic integrity. So I had a doctoral student who submitted their first video submission of their counseling skills. So we're at the doc level. They're in an internship experience demonstrating their counseling skills. So we really have to be mindful of that gatekeeping, right? This is someone who's going to be teaching future professional counselors. So they need to be on point with their skills. And so when I saw their video, there was a lot of concerns that I recognized needed to be worked through. I had reached out to the student. I gave a lot of feedback to the video, and then I reached out to the student and I let them know that, I had this amount of feedback and that if by their second video there wasn't improvement, that at that point I would refer likely for a skills coaching opportunity. But I invited them at that point to also, voluntarily start the skills coaching process now if they felt it was, something that they were interested in. I think that was that like collaborative approach, right? So I was, inviting them in to maybe take some control over their academic process. Um, and maintaining that empathic stance of, here's what you did well, and I can see you're in this place of growth. You're a newly licensed counselor, but these are areas that need to be worked on. So ultimately, the student was really responsive, was very successful through their skills coaching plan. And I think this email response from them is just really powerful. It was something that I definitely like put in my treasure box of like things that are positive because that could have been an option, an opportunity where the student, did feel attacked or felt like there was, this, I'm not meeting that perfectionistic standard. I'm not the best counselor in the world. And, coming at it from that way, but they didn't, they took my feedback and they went with it. And so that was amazing to see. And they said in the very first line is, you are just the reason why I continue at Walden. Your compassion for teaching is so apparent. And so that right there was just huge for me to see that they could view or read through my email that I was being compassionate. And I was exuding that community of care that is so essential to being a part of the academic team at Walden. Um, and so, yeah, this is an example of what that can look like and the outcome, that empowering outcome that we hope for when we embody relational cultural theory as a pedagogy, even in an asynchronous online environment.
And I can pitch in here as an administrator. You may be sitting there going, yeah, that's good. The student was receptive, but what about those students that aren't? And I can tell you, that sometimes a student, when you do set those boundaries, when you do make those necessary referrals, may not receive it that way, right? That they,
Right.
because of their the context that they've had, the experiences they've had in the past, you've softened it as much as you can, and then they come in there like, oh no, you're being biased towards me, you're discriminatory, you're not hearing me. And I can say, what I've witnessed, even when they've even maybe gone to the level of complaining about the instructor, right? Complaining about you to somebody else, the next step that our faculty do, that we encourage our faculty to do, is to reach out to try to have a conversation by phone or by, you could use Collaborate, or you could use, if you have Zoom or Teams or, sorry, that's my puppy. Use whatever you need to have those conversations with him, because I can say, I'm so sorry, 9 times out of 10, students that will de-escalate when they have that conversation with you directly. So the tone that they're reading
Mhm.
from you, or the misconceptions of why you're making this referral or why you're picking on them, 9 times out of 10, I've just witnessed that it completely de-escalates if the student is willing and able to meet with you on the phone or in an online meeting, because then they see the person, right? They see the person behind the instructor. When Jinnelle was talking about power over, power with, yes, you are still in an authoritative role, but you're trying to have a meeting with them so you can show your care and compassion that maybe they've misconstrued and reading that in a different way. So, just
Mhm.
to add another piece to what Jinnelle was saying and the emails, that we get that sometimes when our attempts don't go the way that we wanted them to land, right? And so those conversations can be critical, and it is an additional step for us who live in this asynchronous world, right? Where you have to be vulnerable and step out of your comfort zone of just writing back a quick response or just putting something in the grade book, and maybe your hesitancy to meet with them to talk about it live. It can be intimidating. You don't know what you're walking into at times. But it's so critical, and overwhelmingly I've seen it just ends in a positive result because then they get to
Mhm.
see who you are. So yeah.
Absolutely. And I think that's so important too, Kathleen, because this student was a part of a synchronous classroom. So
Mhm.
there's a 2 hours a week. So they already know my tone. We've had a relationship, right? So the email communication was probably a little bit easier for them to receive knowing the way I communicate versus someone who, like the student I mentioned earlier, I'd never met and was like, I thought you didn't like me. And that ability to just connect over Zoom really kind of made all the difference.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And I know we have limited participants in this presentation live, but Janelle and I did want to just share some things to kind of ground you and help you start thinking from this cultural theory in your own practice. And so not only need to answer all these right here, right now, but sometimes when you're struggling with a student or just thinking to yourself, maybe I don't feel as engaged or connected to these students, or maybe I've hit a really challenging one and I'm not sure where to go next, to kind of just for your own self-reflection of what am I doing to help them see beyond their grades and focus on really what are they learning and how are they growing. Janelle gave a great example of that when she mentioned the student who said, I just didn't think you liked me. And so that student had turned off. And
Mhm.
so her being willing to go back and look at her feedback and say, man, I was kind of really focused on the areas you needed to improve, and I wasn't supporting where you have learned and where you have already shown that you're grasping this and getting it, and how you can maybe do that, further with students. And just looking at how am I proactively managing this? And so, like I mentioned, the phone calls, or Janelle gave some great examples of those emails. And how am I, when I'm sensing maybe there's a misunderstanding somewhere, assuming good intentions, remaining curious, how am I doing that? How am I showing up as an example of how they need to show up? How am I demonstrating, like my expectations? And am I giving that in a way that they can meet my expectations? Am I being very clear and what I'm going to want from them, and meeting with them if I feel like there is that disconnect? And how am I presenting this in a way that's palpable, right?
Mm.
And so you could give the same feedback, but just the words that you're using, and we talk about, I think it was an old seminar I think I went to with Oasis before it was Oasis, where we talked about the sandwich method, that I'm giving
Mhm.
some positives here and then I'm giving this feedback that may be a little bit harder for you to hear, but you need to hear it. And then I'm ending with a checkout, and I'm ending with another positive note of we got a couple more weeks now where we can really tone in on this, that you're giving this in a way that's not going to immediately turn them off and turn them away from even reading the rest of your feedback. And we see this a lot in counseling. You probably see it in other departments as well, is that struggle with perfectionism, looking for that imposter syndrome, and recognizing they're here for a reason. They're here to learn. And sometimes their expectations of themselves at Walden, we have a lot of first generation students, we have a lot of working professionals, and they're here because they want to further themselves. And so, but maybe are thinking, but I need to show up as if I got it, or I need to show up as if I'm already there. And giving them that space to say no, like we all have room to grow, we all have things that the fields are continually updating and new information is out there. And so how to remain curious, and you doing that is modeling for them how they can remain curious and how they can sit in those spaces, and even how you may take things personally. I know, some weeks are harder than others, right? In our roles with students. And so just checking our own attitude, our own, images we're putting out there, or that we're holding about our students, and knowing sometimes when we need a break, right? Like I could send
Mhm.
this email to this student right now, but ooh, I probably need to step away from my computer, right? I probably need to rewrite this, even checking in with a colleague, checking in with your administrator to say, am I reading this tone? Am I taking this personally? How are you reading this, or what are you seeing here? Because sometimes we get in our own way, right? And so being open to that, and to reflect on, is this more me, or is this the student, or is it some of both?
Mhm.
And not, having your team and having your other colleagues that you can go to consult and to check ourselves, and to get some additional feedback. So I talked a lot, Jinnelle.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah, no, it was good. It was all good stuff.
Yeah, yeah. So here's some extra resources that we have, that the university has, that can help guide and shift kind of those parameters, or what we're looking for. There's some other really great recordings that OTLE has in there that you could go back and look at, related to this and related to that community of care and supporting students. So yeah, I think it's great that we have some additional resources that you can use. So.
Yeah.
And then I think that's
Right.
it.
And we do have a couple minutes left if anyone would like to ask questions of our experts here today. You can unmute your microphone or post your question in the chat if there are any questions. I don't see any questions yet. Just compliments, great presentation, great information. So
Thank y'all. Thank y'all for coming.
yes, definitely. Thank you, everyone. It was a pleasure to be with you today. Thank you, Kathleen. Thank you, Jinnelle, for this great presentation and this awesome information that we can all apply here at Walden. So thank you so much for joining us today. For anyone still with us today, please check out our website for additional professional development opportunities that are on our calendar. We look forward to meeting with you again. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.